続いては、不正な救急コミュニティ、何が共有されているについて、アーロン・シュラバーグさんからお話しいただきます。アーロン・シュラバーグさんは、フラッシュポイントのアジア太平洋インテリジェンスチームのシニアアナリストです。彼は北京語を話し、中国に重点を置いて、主要な傾向、脅威のアクター、キャンペーンの分析をされています。それ以前は外交政策、国家安全保障研究の職務に当たっていたそうです。Our next session is Illicit QQ Communities. What's being shared? Please welcome our speaker, Aaron Schraberg.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you to Code Blue and their sponsors for having me. My name is Aaron Schraberg. Today I'm going to jump into discussing with the audience a unique set of data, groups of Chinese-speaking actors on chat tool QQ who are engaged in chatter around fraud and hacking tools, tactics, and techniques. The activities I'll highlight are of QQ members engaging in activity that can be thought of as illicit, illegal, breaking of terms of services agreements, or rent-seeking behavior. And many of these groups, namely technology and hacking themed groups, are sharing files, lots of files, and some of them malicious software, some of which I will show our audience today. First, note about me. As I said, I'm Aaron. I have been researching mostly in Chinese language threats emanating from China externally, as well as threats to businesses in China, both from within China and threats to China from abroad. My journey into Chinese language began back in high school when they offered a pilot program in Chinese language study. It was the only option besides Latin, German, Spanish, and French. I took my first course and I've regretted it ever since, because Chinese is, in my opinion, and I think the opinion of many others, exceedingly difficult. But since then, I've lived in China for 4.5 years, including stints at University in Lanzhou and at Tsinghua University in Beijing. I then pursued my master's degree at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And after 4 years working within the public sector, I began working for various private sector ventures focused on different types of security and risk, including regulatory compliance, illicit finance, sanctions, technology diversion, reputational risk, brand protection, due diligence, and now cyber threats at Flashpoint. So some of our partners in Japan, the Kino Record, are here today, and I really hope to be able to come to Japan in person again one day soon. I was there last year, and it was an amazing experience. So today I'm going to explain what QQ is for the group. I'll go over frequently found fraud types. It won't be a comprehensive overview of all fraud types, and you may have seen some scams not included. There is more content in QQ with over 800 million active monthly users that can be covered in 3 hours, let alone 30 minutes. But I've spent a significant amount of time in this platform learning the language of cyber underground actors. We'll touch on some of that. And I'll also touch on detection avoidance versus turning a blind eye. I posit to you that the fraud types that are top of mind for security practitioners in China and outside of China are not necessarily aligned in many cases because of who or what types of fraud this fraud is harming. So China's recent adoption of a personal information security law, I think, is a move in the right direction, perhaps, for providing more legal framework for pursuing flagrant violations of personally identifiable information in China. But a lot of what I'm seeing in QQ, when I'm seeing bots sold and defrauded, touches on populations or entities outside of China. Moreover, members use slang, memes, and emoticons to avoid detection. I'll end the presentation by discussing the future of threat detection. So what is QQ? QQ was initially released in 1999, making it about 21 years old. Since then, it's gone through successive upgrades and includes the ability to create groups after gradual privilege escalation, which is basically determined by time in the app and amount of activity. Groups are anywhere between tens of users to up to over 1,000. Again, there's over 800 million monthly users on QQ. So my own research comprises a very small amount of that data, but I don't want to downplay what I think is an impactful group of threat actors for reasons that I hope are apparent to you by the end of this presentation. Oh, and the little QQ icon is that cute little penguin on the bottom left. So compared to other apps, according to this Dataport report, QQ still ranks in the top 7 social media platforms. And if you filter for Messenger or chat apps, QQ and WeChat account for 2 of the top 5 apps. So this is a big chunk of global users. And when we talk about impact, we need to talk about scale, which I think is one thing that QQ has. There are a lot of users. So what's an illicit community? Loosely defined, it is a community that supports fraud, cybercrime or financial gain, money laundering, and other illegal activities. Groups also discuss fraud hacking tools and techniques. So as this Flashpoint report shows, typical internet users see about 5% of the regular internet, and there's a whole other section accessible through special browsers, configurations, logins, etc., as many of our audience members know. One of the hallmarks of illicit communities is that their creative use of language, and that's absolutely the case in the Chinese language communities. Pictured are some common examples of hacker slang. As you can see, each slang term is a unique combination of Chinese characters or Chinese characters and English words. Sometimes the slang uses numbers or emoticons. The slang is mature and almost takes on a dialect of its own. So I think time and information and language facility is key to threat detection in this space. So you can see the first one, pants kuzi in Chinese sounds like the word for data in Chinese, being the first letter of the first English word for the Chinese word for Trojan, which is muma. And then the third one down, yuankong, is basically a remote access tool. And then you have DDoS for DDoS, DON being the word for single, as in single point of congestion in a DDoS attack. So let's talk about threats. And I think it would be useful first to talk about threats from the perspective of detection within China. So fraud is reported and notes are published by companies like Tencent, which is the parent company of QQ. Most recent reporting shows the top 3 fraud types are business fraud, income or employment schemes, and friend schemes, which are likely romance type schemes. One issue with the reporting is that they don't define in great detail what these major fraud types are, but we can extrapolate based on online searches and perhaps our own findings discussed today what each fraud type is. A mass study that can adequately quantify fraud is not possible now, but it should come as no surprise that most fraud types are financially motivated in nature. What I assess within the Q groups are a large type of the following types of fraud and different TTPs around these different types of fraud. So credit card fraud, retail and online fraud, phishing, DDoS, some ransomware discussions and chatter, and a lot of file sharing of different types of tools and malicious files. So first, talking about credit card fraud. Within QQ, this type of fraud is highly internationalized, as you can see in the example in the center, which is a snippet from a chat group. You have different types of CDVs targeting countries like Japan, the United States, Europe. It's highly commercialized. A lot of threat actors on QQ do support cryptocurrency payments, and many of them also pivot to other chat tools. So you have tools such as Telegram, which is a borderless chat tool that is not under the influence of the Chinese censorship or monitoring authorities, for example. And so we have evidence in this case. I had to redact the usernames, but this particular QQ user, rather prolific credit card seller, is also active in at least 4 other well-known Telegram channels. So you can see the internationalized nature of this particular fraud type. Same example here, threat actors on QQ discussing dumps, discussing even EMV technology or EMV technology fraud, and also pivoting to Telegram groups to both promote the sales of whatever credit cards they're trying to sell, and also to engage in chatter around different types of known and emerging fraud types in the credit card fraud space. So next up is online fraud. In this space, threat actors engage in various types of retail or online fraud. Essentially, you have e-commerce platforms, all kinds of e-commerce platforms being brought up for sale, even ones that have entered the Chinese market within the last few months, very quickly become swept up in this type of proxy account opening and payment services. A lot of this activity we could qualify as rent-seeking behavior, certainly not terms of service compliant behavior. In some cases, we have examples of merchants furnishing identification documents along with accounts, which is really teetering on a type of synthetic identity fraud or providing false or doctored document fraud with those account sales. And the prices of these go anywhere from 600 to 1600 RMB, depending on whether or not they're secondhand or firsthand or what country they're being offered in. There's a significant effort on QQ to sell social media accounts, and I'm going to pick on Facebook for this one. I think they can take it. Although, as you can see from the ad on the right, companies like Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and Gmail are also included. The market for social media account sales is high. So I think in some sense, this is about enabling access to these social media accounts that folks normally can't have. It's about selling accounts at scale, and perhaps there's some larger conspiracy at play. A lot of chatter suggests that they'll use the accounts for advertising, while others may use them for more nefarious purposes, such as creating the illusion of the endorsement of a product or even a cause. And so I think, especially during election seasons globally, when we think about the ability to spin up social media accounts at scale, groups are likely seeking out these types of services in order to carry out those campaigns. And then to go one step further, here's a price list that we obtained. As you can see on the top right, one account is bought for very little money, a pittance at $2.40. And so a scalable campaign that could leverage these social media accounts is accessible even to resource-restricted groups. When it comes to database sales, QQ members advertise lots of databases. Essentially, the idea, it may come as no surprise, is to monetize whatever data is previously collected. In some cases, threat actors advertise a hodgepodge of data, and it makes me wonder about their credibility, as they look like basically a database junkyard or thrift store. The seller on the right, for example, in this advertisement is selling several different kinds of seemingly unrelated databases. The same threat actor is selling phished emails, as the language in the red box shows. The threat actor in this situation, QQ threat actor provided a sample of 10,000 emails that appear to be emails with passwords seen redacted at left. And regardless of its origin or whether or not it's previously disclosed, the fact that this is spreading in QQ, I think, is significant. But it goes beyond phished data, right? A number of phishing source code files are shared, including the ones listed at right. And that's essentially a snapshot of phishing source code files that are shared within the file sharing feature of QQ groups. And then the names of some common phishing source codes that are shared are in the diagram at right. DDoS is becoming an increasingly popular way for threat actors to threaten organizations. DDoS and DDoS as a service are prolific within QQ groups. And as you can see on the right, the use of memes is just one example of a way that threat actors both avoid detection and also implicate kind of an ambiguous use of their skill set. So this person, it's not clear if they're doing DDoS for good, for ill, or perhaps both. A lot of that information comes out when you track the actor or engage them in some way to find out how their services can be leveraged. But based on limited chatter that we've seen, most of the DDoS discussions in QQ, the open discussions, people express their desire to DDoS gambling sites, some payment services sites, and also pornography sites. So another example of how QQ is one component of a larger network of threat actors, and I want this point to become clear, and I hope it has, is this threat actor in QQ advertises DDoS as a service, and then they have a presence on Telegram, and then they go one step further and have a handle and a public-facing site on Twitter. So it all comes full circle. And obviously, the two services on the right, Telegram and Twitter, are blocked in China, whereas QQ obviously is still used prolifically. obviously, ransomware is top of mind for many security professionals nowadays, and for good reason. As far as ransomware chatter is concerned, there are ransomware-themed groups. A lot of them, at least on the face, advertise ransomware recovery techniques or services, or just information sharing around ransomware. Again, because it is so popular. But if you look within the file sharing folders of these groups, you do find there are examples of file types being shared that may or may not be malicious, may or may not be ransomware. They're there. This is just one example, but I think, obviously you can see something perhaps from NotPetya on the bottom left there. On the middle top, something implying a relationship to the WannaCry ransomware campaigns. And then you have some file names that suggest that this ransomware may be something that is specific to this group, or the name in any case is not clear what exactly it is. And so this presents obviously a challenge for security researchers to try and uncover and investigate exactly what these files are and how they perform, or if they even work. As far as tools and files shared among groups, I can say that it's prolific. We have numerous samples from groups that are copies of widely known tools. China Chopper, for example, on top right, well-known tool, has been used as an attack vector by APT groups, for example. I'm not saying that they're getting their tools from this specific group, but these tools are being shared in the wild. Not surprising, but I think still significant. You also have legacy tools such as Gray Pigeon, Rat, second one from the top. And then again, while sharing tools in the wild is not surprising, I think our aperture or our view into this community of threat actors has traditionally been limited. And unfortunately, the barriers to entry within Chinese language social media spaces like QQ and WeChat, the barrier to entries are growing increasingly more difficult. And so I think that moving forward as security researchers, we are faced, as all people who are trying to study and understand China, which is growing increasingly opaque, especially in the information environment, we're faced with greater challenges. Then add to that just the amount of data, the quantity of data available for analysis is so much greater. So lastly, I wanted to give you a very crude and simple slide about TTPs. As far as accessing all these sites outside of China are concerned, even though Chinese authorities do carry out campaigns to crack down on illicit VPNs, their market for VPN sales in China is still very strong. And I think this screen grab to me just sort of very simply showed you that if you're writing on a Chinese telecom like Zhonghua Liantong, and you have a cell phone and you have a VPN and you have a translation tool, as this user has all four, you can pretty adeptly navigate the card spaces outside of China. For example, this Card Mafia site, which I believe is perhaps based in Russia. So you don't need a lot to get to the other side. So I'm just going to kind of bring it home here, but essentially the fraud types being cracked down in China, I think, are areas that matter most to everyday Chinese online users. Authorities have tended to focus on controlling for sensitive content, and the focus, I think, has been largely on societal unrest. So perhaps the types of frauds that they're pursuing are a function of their goal to rein in anything that would cause instability and discomfort for everyday people. But the fraud types that impact communities outside of China leverage data that isn't from China and pivot back and forth from China-restricted mediums such as QQ to borderless chat apps like Telegram. And I think that this model of cyber underground threat is certainly formidable in the sense that it creates a buffer between domestic Chinese actors and the wider internationalized threat communities. How this is playing out is difficult to know, largely because of a lack of scaled analysis using different threat types to understand connections between the activities that happen outside of China and the chatter taking place within China in tools like QQ and other tools. So I'm going to go ahead and conclude with that, and I welcome any questions. I'll slide over to Slido after this, and hope to see some of you there. So thanks again very much. I appreciate your time. And I'll turn it back over to our hosts.